In this video, as promised, you're going to learn how to use another HTTP API in our weather application. The API we're going to be using provides a geocoding service. Geocoding is the process of taking an address, like Philadelphia, United States, and converting that into a latitude and longitude coordinate pair. And that's a great thing because once we have those coordinates, we'll be able to pass them off to the Dark Sky API to get the weather information for that location. So in the end of the day, it's going to require two HTTP requests to build out the weather app. We're going to chain both together, doing one first, then the other. So down below, that's going to look a bit like this. The user obviously is going to provide an address. Then we will use an API, which we'll explore in this video, to convert that to the lat and long. Then we'll use the coordinate pair with the Dark Sky API up above to get the weather. So the user puts the address in and gets the weather out. At no point do they need to know we converted things to latitude and longitude behind the scenes. Like we did with the Dark Sky API, let's go ahead and move into the browser to explore this service before we try to integrate it into our project. So I'm going to close down some of these tabs, like the Dark Sky API ones, since we already have that integrated, and I'm going to crack open a brand new tab and go over to mapbox.com. Mapbox offers all sorts of interesting location-based services. In this case, we're going to use their geocoding service. Now, if we head over to the pricing page, we will see this is very similarly structured to the Dark Sky API. We can get started for free without providing a credit card or any other information, and we get 50,000 requests a month, which is way more than we'll end up using. Now, once again, we do have to create an account, so Mapbox can provide us with a secret key like we had for Dark Sky. That's going to allow it to track how many requests we're actually making. So I'm going to go to the Getting Started page, and we're just going to sign up for an account, and once we have one, we can integrate what we know about geocoding into the weather app. Let's go ahead and create the account. So I'm going to pick a username. Then I'll provide my email address as well as pick a password for the account, and everything else is completely optional. You don't need to provide your name or your company information. Then we're going to click Getting Started, and this is going to bring us over to the Mapbox dashboard. From here, the first thing we want to do is head over to the Access Tokens tab up top. This is going to bring us to our access token, and this is what we're going to need to provide with our request so Mapbox knows we're actually authenticated and it can associate the request with our account. Now up above, it talks about why we would need an access token, and it links to Mapbox Web Services. These are all of the HTTP requests you can make with the Mapbox toolset, and we're going to crack open that link in a brand new tab. This is Andrew from the future with a quick update. As you'll notice, the API docs you're seeing are different from the API docs I'm seeing in the video. Mapbox reorganized their API docs, changing the layout. Now, the new docs are indeed better, but they're different, which means it was impossible to follow along with the old video. So what I'm doing here is refilming the next 5 or so minutes where we explore how we'll be using Mapbox. Once we're done with that, we'll get back into the regular video. The actual endpoints and what data we get back, that hasn't changed at all. It's just the API docs that have been redesigned and reorganized. So let's get to it. Here are the new API docs, and this should be similar to what you're seeing. Now, there are a lot of different features documented here. What we're looking for is in the sidebar under Search Service. If we click on that, this brings us over to their geocoding service. That's what's going to allow us to take addresses like this one and convert them into coordinate pairs. Once we've converted the address into the coordinate pair, we can pass the latitude and longitude off to Dark Sky to actually fetch the weather. We can see right here that this API supports two different types of geocoding. We have forward geocoding and reverse geocoding. We want forward geocoding. That's when we provide an address and get back the latitude and longitude, and reverse geocoding just does the opposite. In this case, though, we have the address, we want the coordinate pair, so we'll use forward geocoding. Now, if we scroll down onto this page, we get to the endpoints section, and if we keep going past that, eventually we get to forward geocoding, and this is the endpoint we're going to be using. We'll provide our address, we'll get back the latitude and longitude. Now down below, we can see there are two required parameters. One is the endpoint. We're going to use mapbox.places. This is the main one. The other one is reserved for enterprise customers. And we also have the search text. This is where we provide the address. Down below the required parameters, we can see there are a bunch of optional ones, which also allow us to customize that operation, and we'll explore a couple of these in just a few minutes. If we keep scrolling down, though, the next thing we run into is example request with forward geocoding. Now right here, they're just using the curl command from the terminal to fetch the given endpoint, but let's examine the endpoint and then we'll see what data we get back. So it starts off with the base URL, that is https API mapbox.com. Then we have this portion of the URL right here. We are using their geocoding API. It is version 5. Then we provide those two required parameters. As mentioned, we have mapbox.places, and then we have our search term. Right here, the example request is searching for Los Angeles. So what we get back would be the coordinate pair for that location. Next up, we have a bunch of other information. We have .json, so we're going to get JSON data back. And here we start the query string. Now, we have key value pairs inside of here, and by default, there is only one. It is access token. This is where we provide the API token for our account, and we can see that it's already set up in the URL right here, and it runs on quite a bit. So what we're going to do is take this URL, bring it over to the browser, and explore the response data. Once we're comfortable with it, we'll customize it with a few of those optional parameters. Then we'll actually integrate this into our project code. So right here, let's take the entire URL without those double quotes. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard, and once I have it, we're just going to crack open a new browser tab and visit that URL. When we do, what do we get? As expected, we get a JSON response. Let's explore the JSON response, and to start, I'm going to collapse the expanded properties, query, and features. And right here, we can see that the root of our response is just an object with 4 properties: type, query, features, and attribution. Now, query just lets us know what we provided. So right here, we have the search terms that we provided via the URL up above. It is the features array that contains the interesting data we want to extract. Now you'll notice it's an array of 5 items. So by default, Mapbox is going to return the 5 most relevant search results for your search term, and the most relevant one comes first. So Los Angeles in California is not the only Los Angeles out there. It happens to be the first result since it's the most relevant, but there are other cities with the same name. So let's dive into the features array and see exactly what we get. Right here, the first object in the features array is what we're going to focus on. It starts up above and it ends way down here. And this is the most relevant search result for our keywords. Right here, we can see there are a lot of properties. One that's interesting is place name. Los Angeles, California, United States. So right here, this is something we can display to the user so they know exactly where they're getting the weather for. And if they see this and it's not the Los Angeles they expected, they can always change their search term to target a different city with the same name. Now, aside from place name, we also need the latitude and the longitude, and those are available via the center property. It is an array with 2 numbers inside. The first number, that is the longitude, and the second number, that is the latitude. So we're going to be able to extract these 2 values from the JSON response and pass those off to the Dark Sky API to fetch the weather for this location. Before we go any further, let's head back over to the API docs and explore some of the optional parameters. So right here, we have a nice list of optional ones. One that might be of interest to us is language. Language allows us to customize the language that's being used in the response. So right here, if I was creating an application specifically for German users or specifically for French users, I could customize the response with language to get things back in their native tongue. Now down below language, we have other options as well, one being limit. Limit allows us to specify the maximum number of results we can return. Now by default, it's 5. We've seen that, and the maximum supported is 10. In our case, we know that we're only ever going to use the first result. That's what we're going to fetch the weather for. So we could actually set limit to 1, requiring less data to be sent back, speeding up the request. So let's get that done. We're going to use limit in our URL over here. Now the URL already sets up our query string. It starts with the question mark, and we provide our first key value pair. The key is access token, then it's equals followed by this really long value. At the end of that token, we're going to set up another key value pair for the query string. We use the ampersand followed by the key, that is limit, followed by equals, then the value, and right here, we'll just limit it to 1 search result. Let me bring that back up just so you can see it. There's exactly what we're using. Now, in this case, if I refresh the page, I can see that the features array is still an array. It's just an array of 1 item. So right here, we have the most relevant result. Once again, it is Los Angeles in California. If someone wanted to target a different Los Angeles, they could add more content to the search term to be more specific. Now that we have this in place, let's continue on with the regular programming as we're done exploring the changes made to the API documentation. Thanks for bearing with me. Let's get to it. And now let's talk about what I'd like you to do as your challenge for the video. The goal for now is to not worry about integrating the 2 requests together. We'll get to that shortly. The goal for the moment is to just create a completely separate request, getting this URL integrated into our application. So right here, what you do is not going to tie in with what we have above in any way whatsoever, and that is the point for now. The goal is to print the latitude and the longitude for Los Angeles, which is indeed the search term we've used in the URL we have in the browser. So step 1, you're going to fire off a new request to the URL we explored in the browser, and you're going to have the request module parse it as JSON like we did above. From there, you're going to print both the latitude and longitude to the terminal, and you're going to use the 2 values on the center array for that, the first being the latitude and the second being the longitude. Then finally, you're going to test your work. Run this file, make sure you see the weather print from up above, and make sure you see your lat and long coordinate pair printing down below. Once again, there's no need to communicate between these 2 requests at all for now. The goal is to have a completely separate request, just getting the geocoding service set up in our application in some way. Take as much time as you need to knock that one out, pause the video, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Down below, I'm going to kick things off by first getting that URL into my application code. So over here, we're going to grab the URL exactly as we had it in the browser without making any changes whatsoever, and I'm going to store it in a new variable, const. Now, URL is already taken, so I'll use something like geocoding or geocode URL. Perfect. Now that we have that variable set up, we can paste the URL right inside of my single quotes, right inside of the string, and down below, we're going to fire off our request. So right here, what do? We call request exactly like we did up above, and we pass in those 2 important pieces of information to the options object. The first is the URL. Now we have that stored in our new geocode URL variable. And the second is the JSON in lowercase property, which we're going to set to true, so the data gets parsed automatically for us. Now, from here, we can go ahead and move on to the function that's going to run when we get our response back. We know this function gets called with 2 arguments. The first argument is the error, which is not something we've explored yet, but something we will explore shortly. And the other argument, that is the response. On response, we can find the data we need. Now this brings us to step 3. We want to print the latitude and the longitude to the terminal, and we know we have both of those sitting right here. So we have to navigate through this data structure to get to those 2 values, and we're going to do that in our function. To start, I'm going to create 2 variables to extract those 2 values. Now, this was not an essential piece to the challenge. Maybe you just went right into a console.log call. That would have worked just fine too. Right here, though, I'll start by creating a const, and I'll call this one latitude. I'm going to set it equal to, and we know we want to go to response.body, which is this object, the one we've used before with the dark sky API. Now from there, we want to access features. So response.body.features, that's an array of just 1 item. We're going to grab that first one by index using bracket notation. And then from there, we want to access what's on center. So .center. Now center is also an array, the first one being the latitude. So I'll grab that and there we go. Now we have the latitude stored in a variable. Let's go ahead and set up another variable for the longitude. This variable is going to get its value from a similar place, response.body.features, accessing the first item, then .center. This is the second item with an index of 1. Andrew from the future with one more quick interruption. Once again, I did reverse the order. So up above, you can see the code I just typed, which is incorrect. Down below, we have the correct version. The latitude comes from the second item in that array with the index of 1, and the longitude comes from the first item in that array with the index of 0. I do address this in the video in a couple of lectures when I finally realize my mistake. Now we can go ahead and actually print both of those values to the console. So console.log, I will print latitude first, then a comma to pass in a second argument to print longitude. Once again, if your console.log call looks different, that is okay. The goal is to just get that information printing. It doesn't matter the exact format it's printed in for now. The last thing to do was to test our work, making sure this request and our code inside of the function actually works as expected. I'm going to go ahead and rerun the file. This is going to show both things. It's going to show the lat and long as well as the weather. And right here we have our data. I have -118, which is exactly what I have over here. And I have 34, which also matches up with the values I'm seeing in the center array. Now that we have this in place, we are all done with the challenge and we can remove those challenge comments. And now we have 2 API requests in our program. The first, the one we just created, that allows us to convert an address into the lat-long coordinate pair. And the second allows us to take the lat-long and convert that into a weather forecast. So the user gives us an address and they get back the weather for that location. Now, there's a lot more to say about various things related to asynchronous programming and HTTP requests, so we're going to continue on with all of this in the next video. I'll see you then.